This week in Linux, we have some interesting distro news from CachyOS and Chrome OS. We also have some news that the Plasma Bigscreen project is back on the air from KDE. We've also got some new releases from the open source 3D rendering powerhouse, Blender, and the popular dynamic tiling wayland compositor, Hyprland. All of this and more on This Week in Linux, the weekly news show that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world. So let's jump right into your source for Linux good news. This episode of Twill is sponsored by Sandfly Security. More on them later. The CachyOS team have announced the latest release of their distribution with CachyOS July 2025 release. And this is the 5th release of the year. And for those unfamiliar, CachyOS is an Arch-based distribution with kernel optimizations, making it a great option for people who are in a situation where they want maximum performance. Now, it's not for everyone. It is an Arch-based distribution. It's not like beginner-friendly necessarily, but it is very good for options for people who have the latest and greatest hardware. So if you have something that just came out and you want to have an up-to-date, as up-to-date as possible for support, then CachyOS is one that you should probably check out. What's new in the latest release of CachyOS July 2025 is you can now choose your shell on the installation. So when you install your system, you can choose which shell between 3 options. You have Fish, ZSH, and Bash. Fish is the default option, but so if you don't pick anything, that's what you're going to get, but you can choose to use the ZSH option or Bash if you prefer. And to fix some issues with sometimes the processes being killed too early, they've decided to remove the integration with systemd. Now for the Plasma installations of CachyOS, they're going to be defaulting to Wayland now with this release. The X11 session will automatically be installed on systems that don't support Wayland that well. For example, legacy NVIDIA. So X11 is still going to be there, but by default, it will be Wayland unless it is using some kind of older NVIDIA hardware. They've also added FWUPD, or FWUPD, which is the firmware updater tool for the GNOME edition and the Plasma edition. The last release of CachyOS, they actually dropped support for their own custom browser, the Cachy browser. And this release, they have added a new configuration settings package so that you can have the configuration they did have with the Cachy browser with the regular Firefox install. But there's also an option for those who want an pre-compiled optimized version of Firefox with Firefox Pure. They've also added some bonus performance optimizations such as anti-lag 2 for Mesa Git and Proton CachyOS. Also, games that support FSR 3.1 will be automatically upgraded to FSR 4 now, which is really cool. And better Wayland support for the Proton CachyOS is also available. There's also an update for this release of the handheld edition, which will add support for the Legion Go. CachyOS is a really cool distribution, and there's a lot of benefits to it, but again, it's not necessarily beginner-friendly. It's much more beginner-friendly than Arch is by default. But at the same time, it's not something I would necessarily recommend. But if you have a system that has a lot of newer hardware and you need to have a more up-to-date system to get that support, then CachyOS is definitely something to check out. So if you're interested, you'll find links in the show notes. The Hyprland team have announced the latest release of their dynamic tiling window manager for Wayland. Hyprland 0.50 is here. For those who are unfamiliar, it is known for being one of the most powerful, innovative, and fast-moving Wayland tiling window managers. And on their website, they talk about it being the modern compositor with the looks. Dynamic tiling, all the eye candy, powerful plugins, and much more. It's a very cool project. It is not for the average user. It is for people who are more like enthusiasts, because tiling window management is a thing that you need to get used to. It is very cool and it offers a lot of benefits, but it's not necessarily for everyone, so just so you know. But if you are interested in tiling window management, then Hyprland is definitely something you should check out. In the latest release of Hyprland 0.50, they have now set explicit sync to be used by default. They have also decided to drop legacy rendering, so it now requires at least GLES 3.0. And there's a new experimental feature that switches to triple buffering when your system cannot keep up. So this is for systems that are slightly underpowered perhaps, or you're trying to do something that will cause a lot of resource usage. So this will drastically improve FPS on underpowered devices. And for systems that don't need it, there should be no performance or latency cost when the system is running fine. Also in this release, you can add a no screen share rule to Windows so that you can prevent them from being recorded or screen shared, which would be good for privacy concerns. If you are streaming something and you accidentally show a window you didn't mean to, you can use this to make sure that it can't be done. They've also built a new internal test framework, which is going to be used to automatically run tests on new commits. And this is good to kind of catch regressions if they happen. So that is really good to see. And of course, as always, with new releases of any kind of software, there's a bunch of bug fixes, patches, and all that sort of stuff. So if you'd like to learn more about the latest release of Hyprland or just Hyprland in general, you'll find links in the show notes. The Blender team have announced the latest release of the Blender project. And for those who don't know, Blender is a super powerful open source 3D rendering project. And it is basically the de facto at this point for a lot of people who do motion graphics or 3D rendering or 3D modeling, all sorts of stuff. Blender is a Swiss Army knife of sorts in that field. And actually, after a few years of work, Vulkan is now on par with the OpenGL support, which brings a lot of benefits. When enabled, it will bring significant performance boosts. It also adds better support and features such as OpenXR, Subdivision, USD Hydra, and more. Also with this release, it is not just a typical release, it is an LTS or long-term support release. So Blender 5 or 4.5 is also Blender 4.5 LTS. As with every new release of Blender, there's new nodes that you can get benefits from, such as the geometry nodes now lets you import CSV files, STL files, VDB files, OBJ files, and text files into the system. And also string nodes makes importing sequences as flexible as it could possibly be. And also custom mesh normals are now editable in the geometry nodes with the set mesh normal node. Also, there's new grease pencil nodes that have been added to this release and many more. Also, there's more benefits of the performance, not just the Vulkan backend. There's also some extra performance improvements that have been made. For example, the vertex to edge attribute domain interpolation is now 1.7 times faster. Corner to vertex attribute is 1.4 times faster. Face to vertex interpolation is up to 7 times faster. Face, corner, and custom normals twice as fast. Startup time went from 7 seconds to 4 seconds, and texture loading time has been cut in half. There's also a new Shadow Terminator bias, which removes artifacting on low polygon geometry. Point cloud is a new object type for representing large numbers of points in a 3D space, which is great for 3D scan data, particle simulations, or sparse data sets. There's also new shortcuts for easy frames in the node editors. You can now hide tabs in the property editor and also many, many more features. There's just way too many to list. And for those who are interested in trying out a new game, you can check out the one from Blender Studios because along with this release, they also released a new free open source game called Dog Walk, and that is on Steam. I have some really cool news for those who are interested in upscaling or lossless scaling because frame generation with lossless scaling is now going to be available for Linux. Although it's still in the working progress. It's not necessarily available for everyone, but this is very exciting news because even though it's in the early stages, there's a lot of fast progress being made. And for those who don't know, lossless scaling is a paid tool on Windows that enables both upscaling and frame generation. It operates on the system level rather than a driver-based solution or as a game mod. And this is a standalone software that does not need DLSS or FSR to work. And they're also working on adding more GPU support to the project. But now, though, there's an open source project called LSFG-VK, and the paid lossless scaling tool now has Linux support thanks to it. Now, like I said, this is the early stages, but it is making fast progress. For example, it only took 4 days from the original release for them to upgrade support to LSFG version 3.1. Lossless scaling is also useful for upscaling modern games if you cannot run them on native screen resolutions. So like if you have a limited GPU, for example, and want to get rid of blur due to bilinear scaling of the GPU driver, as well as for upscaling older and pixel art games, which do not support modern screen resolutions or full screen mode. You can use it to help with those as well. I think this is awesome to see because lossless scaling is a very cool project, and being only Windows related, it wasn't that important to me before, but now that there's being support for Linux being added, that is very awesome because the upscaling aspects of these kinds of things is very cool because it's not just dependent on a particular hardware. Like, for example, FSR is for AMD users, DLSS is for NVIDIA users, and this doesn't really care about either one of those, so it can work on both and also perhaps more GPUs in the future. So this is really cool to see, and I'm excited to see how far they can push this support on Linux. You chose Linux for its stability and security, but as threats grow more sophisticated, detecting them in time without putting your system at risk is more critical than ever. Traditional endpoint agents can cause downtime and performance issues, leaving visibility gaps. I mean, isn't there a better way? Well, there is, and that is Sandfly Security. And we are proud to have them sponsor This Week in Linux. And Sandfly Security is the agentless Linux security platform. Sandfly not only does endpoint detection and response, but also performs SSH key tracking, password auditing, and drift detection to find the widest range of threats. Whether your servers are in the cloud, on-premises, or in embedded devices, Sandfly protects them all without the need for risky agent installations. Listen to what Ken Kleiner, the senior security engineer at the University of Massachusetts, has to say. Sandfly is the first product that I've seen that accurately and quickly detects thousands of signs of compromise on the Linux platform. Its unique method automates tasks which would be manually impossible. Automation is key with detection, and Sandfly completely fits this and other requirements. If your organization is using Linux, this should be part of your cybersecurity toolset. So get fast, non-invasive protection for your critical systems, no agents, no downtimes, just smarter security that works. Dive into the future of Linux security at thisweekinlinux.com/Sandfly and see how Sandfly can transform your security strategy. And if you're as fascinated by cybersecurity as much as I am, then go check out the interview we had on Destination Linux with the CEO of Sandfly. He has an awesome story about how he got into Linux, how he got into security, and DEF CON even shows up in that interview. So go check it out at destinationlinux.net/409. Plus, if you want to save some money, you can check out the Home Edition and use the discount code of Destination to get 50% off the Home Edition. So go to thisweekinlinux.com/SANDFLY. That's thisweekinlinux.com/Sandfly to get started. I have some really awesome news for anyone who's interested in stress testing their system, because the popular stress testing app OCCT recently arrived on Linux, and they even have a special Steam Deck version. For those who are not familiar, OCCT stands for Overclock Checking Tool and allows testing for system stability, diagnosing hardware issues, and monitoring performance. And in addition to having Linux support, they also recently switched fully to Vulkan for their rendering from DirectX. This gives them a lot of benefits. For example, they have now a unified GPU detection algorithm, a simpler, more robust code base, better performance, more accurate results, and more. So this is a great tool for anyone who wants to do overclocking and watch their overclocking and check it and all that sort of stuff. If you're interested in that, you'll find links in the show notes. There's some interesting news going around related to Google's Chrome OS, and apparently it's going to be merging with Android. In a Tech Radar article, Samir Samat, not sure if I said that right, sorry if I didn't, the president of Android ecosystem, states, "We're going to be combining Chrome OS and Android into a single platform." Even outside of this interview, this has been going on for a very long time. There's been rumors for years that this was going to happen, and even internal reports from Google back in November of last year. So now we just have a person at Google confirming that it is going to happen. Now, I wanted to touch on some stuff that the OMG Ubuntu article said, because they have some interesting points that Chrome OS right now is directionless and doesn't have a purpose. It started as a very lightweight web-first OS, but now is like a collection of containers and subsystems trying to get Android apps and Linux apps working without really doing either one of them that well. And with that, well, Android can do basically everything Chrome OS can do now, and it even has the ability to run GPU-accelerated Linux VMs, as we talked about in a previous episode of Twill, and has been able to run Linux containers for years at this point. So I guess we'll see what happens with the Chrome OS and Chromebooks. Will they rebase on Android? Will they merge them together? Is it just going to abandon Chrome OS entirely and just make Android their new approach? We'll have to wait and see on that. But it does seem like they're actually going to be making some big changes here for the Chromebooks line. Have you ever heard of Plasma Bigscreen? Maybe you haven't, because it's been a while since it's been talked about here on the show or in general. But Plasma Bigscreen looks like it's going to be back on the air. Plasma Bigscreen is a TV interface that is built with the Plasma framework, and it's existed for a few years. But honestly, I kind of forgot about it since they hadn't made much movement on it for a while. So I thought they just kind of abandoned it. But it seems like that is not the case. OMG Ubuntu is reporting that there is a revamp being worked on that brings a much cleaner UI with a flat design. The settings interface was also redone with a new custom-made component library made for building Linux TV-focused UIs. There are still things to be worked on, like there's no virtual keyboard with arrow navigation, but with some work, this could become a great open-source media center option, and maybe even could build the groundwork to a Linux video game console, like maybe a distro using Plasma Bigscreen as the UI rather than Steam Big Picture mode. Something like that. This would be interesting as an alternative to Steam. Well, obviously, if it's built on like a Steam-based platform, they would use Steam Big Picture. But it could be really cool in sense of like doing something along the lines of having, not just Steam, but also Heroic and Lutris and combining it all together and then using Plasma Bigscreen as a way to do the media center and that sort of stuff. Or in general, I think this would be a really good set-top box option because it looks like there's a lot of potential here, especially because with the screenshot, as you can see, not only do you have the option to use Plasma Bigscreen, but it also has Kodi integration. So you can kind of get, if you've not heard of Kodi, Kodi's a really cool media center interface. So you could have a combination of both of them, which would be pretty powerful. So I hope this project stays on the air, and because I can't wait to try it out. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on the show and want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world, then be sure to subscribe. And of course, remember to like that smash button. If you'd like to support the show and the Tux Digital Network, then consider becoming a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/membership, where you get a bunch of cool perks, like access to the patron-only sections of our Discord server, and much, much more, like access to the patron-only post show that happens every week after the live show, and so much more. You can also support the show by ordering the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt or the This Week in Linux shirt at the store, tuxdigital.com/store. Plus, while you're there, check out all the other cool stuff we have, like hats, mugs, hoodies, and so much more at tuxdigital.com/store. I'll see you next time for another episode of your source for Linux GNews. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell. I hope you're doing swell. Be sure to ring that notification bell. And until next time, I bid you farewell.